I used to work as an overnight security guard at a massive office complex on the edge of town. The place wasn't new. It was built in the late 70s, with that dated, boxy architecture and endless fluorescent hallways that all looked the same. During the day, it was filled with hundreds of office workers, but at night, it became a completely different place. The silence hit you first. The building seemed too big, too empty, like the walls themselves were listening. My job was pretty simple: make rounds on each floor, check doors, and watch the cameras in the control room. It was boring work most nights, but boring was good. Boring meant safe. But then came one night in January that I'll never forget. My shift started like usual: clock in at 11:45 p.m., grab a coffee from the vending machine, and sit in the security office watching the grainy black and white monitors. There were about 30 cameras scattered across the building: parking lot, stairwells, hallways, elevators. Most of the time, all I saw were empty corridors. Around 1:15 a.m., I noticed something strange on camera 14, which showed the third-floor hallway. The lights there flickered once, then steadied. That wasn't too unusual. The wiring in that wing was old. But then I saw movement. At the far end of the hall, there was a figure. It looked like a person standing completely still. No one should have been there. Every office door was locked, and I was the only one with access after midnight. I leaned closer to the monitor, trying to make out details. The figure was tall, but the camera's poor resolution made it impossible to see a face. Just a shadow-like outline, standing motionless. I switched to camera 15, which covered the same hallway from a different angle, but it was empty. Nothing there. I went back to camera 14. The figure was gone. My stomach sank. I knew I had to check it out. Grabbing my flashlight and keys, I left the office and headed for the elevator. The ride up to the third floor felt unusually long. When the doors opened, I was met with silence. That thick, heavy silence only a big empty building has. I walked down the hallway slowly, shining my flashlight at each door. Everything was locked. Everything was still. Halfway down, I stopped. The lights overhead flickered again. Just once. And in that brief moment of darkness, I could have sworn I saw someone standing at the end of the hall. When the light came back, it was empty. I stood frozen, my pulse pounding. But after a minute of nothing happening, I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe the camera glitched. Maybe I imagined the figure when the lights flickered. I finished the patrol and went back to the office. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., things escalated. I was back in the security office when I heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing through the building. Faint, but unmistakable. I muted the TV in the corner just to be sure. The sound was real. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They seemed to be coming from the stairwell near the east wing. I checked the stairwell camera. Nothing. Just an empty set of concrete steps. But the footsteps kept going, steady, echoing, like someone was climbing higher. I grabbed my radio and flashlight again, even though there was no one else on shift to call for backup. As I opened the office door, I realized something chilling. The footsteps had stopped, and the silence that replaced them felt worse. I decided to check the break room first, since it was right by the stairwell. When I walked in, the smell of burnt coffee hit me. But what made me stop dead in my tracks was the microwave. It was running. The timer showed 3 o'clock minutes counting down. But the room was empty. The thing is, I hadn't been in the break room all night. No one had. The microwave door was shut, spinning an empty plate inside. I turned it off, my hand shaking as I pressed the button. That's when I heard it again. Those footsteps, this time right outside the break room door. Slow. Heavy. Getting closer. I spun around, ready to confront whoever was messing with me. But when I yanked the door open, the hallway was empty. No footsteps. No one in sight. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. Something wasn't right. I hurried back to the office and started cycling through the cameras again. That's when I saw it. On camera 9, covering the lobby, there was a man. He was standing in front of the glass entrance doors, facing the building. But his face was pressed so close to the glass that all I could see was a pale blur. He didn't move, didn't knock, didn't try to come in. He just stood there. I switched to camera 10, which showed the lobby from a side angle. The man wasn't there. I went back to camera 9. The man was gone. I felt my blood run cold. By this point, I was on edge. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That I saw a ghost on the security cameras? Still, I had to finish my rounds. It was around 4:30 when I reached the basement storage area. The place always creeped me out. Low ceilings, buzzing lights, rows of old file cabinets. As I turned a corner, I froze. There was someone at the far end of the basement. A tall figure, standing perfectly still, facing me. This wasn't a flicker on a camera. This wasn't my imagination. I could see him with my own eyes. I shined my flashlight, but the beam seemed weaker than usual, like the darkness was swallowing it. The figure didn't move. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You're not supposed to be down here." No response. I took one step forward, then another. My heartbeat was so loud I could barely hear my own footsteps. Then, without warning, the lights overhead went out. Pitch black. I froze, my flashlight flickering in my hand. And in that moment of darkness, I heard it, breathing, right next to me. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I bolted back up the stairs, 2 at a time, not daring to look behind me. By the time I reached the ground floor, my lungs were burning and my hands were trembling so badly I could barely get the office door open. I locked myself inside the security office and sat there until my shift ended at 7 a.m., refusing to look at the cameras again. When the day staff arrived, I handed in my badge and keys without explanation. I never went back. A week later, out of morbid curiosity, I looked up the history of the building. Turns out, back in the 80s, a night security guard had died on the job. Some say it was a heart attack in the basement. Others whisper it wasn't natural, that he was found with a look of pure terror frozen on his face. I don't know what I saw that night. But I know this, working alone at night seemed like easy money, until it wasn't. Hospitals never really sleep. Even at 2 or 3 in the morning, there's always something happening. A patient moaning in a distant room, the hum of machines, the squeak of a janitor's cart down the hallway. But the energy is different. Daytime is busy, full of voices and footsteps. Nighttime. It feels like the building itself is holding its breath. That's what made the night shift seem like easy money. I was 23, fresh out of school, working as a patient care tech in a mid-sized hospital in Ohio. My job was pretty simple: stock supplies, check vitals, answer call lights. I didn't mind it. The pay was decent, the nights were usually quiet, and honestly, I liked the calm compared to the chaos of daytime shifts. But there was one wing of the hospital that everyone hated getting assigned to: the Old South Wing. It wasn't abandoned, technically. A few overflow patients ended up there when the main rooms filled up, but for the most part, it sat half empty. The lighting was dimmer, the paint was older, and it always felt a little colder in that section. Nurses used to joke that it was haunted, but I never believed in that kind of stuff. At least, not until that one night. It was a Tuesday in January. Bitter cold outside, snow piled along the parking lot. The kind of night where you're grateful just to be indoors. My supervisor handed me my assignment sheet, and of course, I got the South Wing. "Lucky you," she said with a smirk. I laughed it off, grabbed my cart, and headed down. The moment I pushed open the double doors into the wing, that familiar chill ran over me. The halls were too quiet. You could hear every little thing: the buzz of the fluorescent lights, the hum of the air vents, the squeak of my shoes on the tile. There were only 3 patients down there that night. Room 212, 218, and 224. All elderly, all stable. Easy night, I thought. But when I walked past room 216, something strange happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement inside. Just a shadow, quick, against the wall. I stopped, turned my head, and looked into the room. Empty. No bed, no furniture. Just an unused room with the blinds drawn. I shook it off. Probably just my own shadow stretching weird under the lights. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone down there. As the night went on, little things started piling up. Around midnight, I was restocking supplies when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I stepped out, expecting to see a nurse or another tech. But the hall was empty. I stood there for a second, listening. The sound stopped. Then, just as I turned back into the supply closet, I heard it again. This time, closer. I spun around. Nothing. Okay, maybe one of the patients had gotten up to use the restroom. That was possible. So I checked each room. 212, patient asleep. 218, patient watching late-night TV. 224, patient dozing, heart monitor beeping steady. No one was in the hallway. That's when I noticed something odd. The door to room 216, the empty room, was slightly open. I knew for a fact it had been closed earlier. My stomach tightened, but I walked over and pushed it shut. It clicked into place. Solid. But as soon as I started walking away, I swear I heard the faint sound of breathing inside the room. I froze. Listened. Nothing. I told myself I was just tired. Overthinking. It was a long shift, and creepy old hallways can mess with you. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. By 2:30 a.m., the atmosphere had shifted from uneasy to downright suffocating. The south wing felt colder than the rest of the hospital. My breath wasn't visible, but the chill seeped into my bones. And then came the call light. The panel above the nurse's station lit up. Room 216. My heart dropped. That room was empty. For a long minute, I just stared at the light, half expecting it to turn off on its own. But it didn't. It stayed glowing red, calling me. Finally, I grabbed my clipboard and forced myself to walk down the hall. The door to 216 was shut again. I hesitated, then pushed it open. The room was dark. Empty. Silent. I stepped inside, flicked the light switch. Nothing. The overhead lights didn't come on. I backed out quickly, heart pounding. The call light panel at the nurse's station was off now, as if it had never lit up at all. I tried to shake it off. Electrical glitch. Faulty wiring. Old hospital wing. That was all. But then the whispers started. I was at the nurse's desk, charting vitals, when I heard them. Faint. Indistinct. Like two people having a hushed conversation down the hall. I leaned back in my chair, straining to listen. It was coming from the direction of room 216. I told myself again, maybe one of the patients left their TV on. But when I checked, each room was quiet. TVs off. Patients asleep. The whispers, though, they didn't stop. They grew clearer. Except I couldn't understand the words. It wasn't English. It wasn't even a language I recognized. Just low, rhythmic murmurs, echoing down the hall. I stood frozen, clutching my clipboard so hard my knuckles ached. Finally, I whispered to myself, I'm not doing this. Nope. I grabbed my stuff and went to sit in the main wing until shift change. But before I could leave the south wing, something happened that I'll never forget. The overhead intercom crackled to life. It was supposed to only be used for emergencies or announcements. But instead of a nurse's voice, what came through was breathing. Heavy, slow breathing. It filled the entire wing, echoing from the speakers. I froze, heart racing. Then, beneath the breathing, a voice whispered, so soft I almost didn't catch it. Why did you open the door? My blood ran cold. I turned, instinctively, toward room 216. The door was wide open now. Inside, the lights flickered once, then went dark again. I swear I saw a figure standing in the shadows, tall, still, watching. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The intercom clicked off. Silence. And then every call light on the panel lit up at once. Every room in the south wing, even the empty ones, flashing, demanding. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I bolted out of there, heart slamming against my ribs, and didn't stop until I was back in the main wing, surrounded by people and noise and light. The next morning, I told my supervisor what had happened. I expected her to laugh it off. Instead, her face went pale. "You said 216, she asked. I nodded. She leaned in, lowered her voice. "That room's been sealed off for years. We don't put patients in there. Not since." She trailed off, then shook her head. "Never mind. Just stay out of there." I pressed her, but she wouldn't say more. Later, one of the older nurses filled me in. Years ago, a patient had died in room 216 under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was a heart attack. But the staff whispered about strange occurrences leading up to it. Voices, shadows, call lights going off with no one inside. Administration eventually just closed the room. But sometimes, the call light still goes on. Sometimes, people hear the breathing. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to be working the night shift, the door opens. Most people don't think about what happens inside big office buildings after hours. By day, they're full of people, meetings, the buzz of printers, and the smell of coffee. But once the sun sets, those same places feel like ghost towns. The silence echoes down long hallways, and every sound feels louder than it should. For Paul, that silence was his job. He was the night janitor at a mid-sized corporate office downtown. He wasn't new to it. He'd been cleaning buildings for years. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and most nights, it was easy money. All he had to do was make his rounds, mop the floors, empty the trash, and keep the place in shape for the morning shift. Paul liked the routine. He liked being alone. Nobody breathing down his neck, no co-workers to deal with. Just him, his mop bucket, and the hum of the building. But there's one thing about working nights that most people don't realize. Buildings feel alive. They creak, they groan, the air vents sigh. At first, Paul chalked it up to settling noises, but after a few months, he swore he could almost feel the building watching him back. It all came to a head one night. It was a Friday, usually his quietest shift. By 9 p.m., the last of the office workers had cleared out. The lights clicked off one floor at a time, and Paul started his routine. He always began on the lower levels and worked his way up. By midnight, he reached the 8th floor, the last stop before heading to the rooftop parking garage. The 8th floor was his least favorite. Not because it was haunted or anything like that, but because it always felt wrong. The floor was half empty, with offices that had been cleared out years ago when the company downsized. Desks covered in white sheets. Old file cabinets no one bothered to move. And it was quiet. The kind of quiet that rang in your ears. Paul pushed his cart off the elevator, the wheels squeaking in protest. The overhead lights flickered once before steadying, casting the long hallway in a sterile glow. Final round, Paul muttered to himself. He started down the hall, humming under his breath just to fill the silence. That's when he noticed it. A door. Half open. Office 8 to 12. Paul stopped. He was sure he'd closed it earlier in the week. He always kept track of little things like that. Maybe one of the daytime workers had left it open. Or maybe the maintenance guys had been in there. Still, it bugged him. He pushed the door the rest of the way open. Inside was an empty office. Dusty carpet, a desk with no chair, blinds half drawn. Nothing unusual. But for some reason, Paul's skin prickled. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just been in there. He shut the door, maybe a little faster than necessary, and kept moving. As he worked, things got stranger. He'd be mopping one section of floor, and behind him, he swore he heard footsteps. Slow, dragging ones. He'd spin around, nothing there. Just the echo of his own movements. A trash can he'd emptied minutes earlier suddenly had papers in it again. A light at the far end of the hall flicked on by itself. Paul told himself he was just tired. That's what happens on night shifts, your brain starts to play tricks on you. But when he turned the corner, his heart stopped. The door to office 8 to 12 was open again. Wide open. This time, he was sure. He had closed it. He felt his throat go dry. He reached for the door handle, ready to slam it shut again, when something caught his eye. Inside, the desk wasn't empty anymore. A chair was pulled out, facing the door, and on top of the desk was a stack of papers. Paul froze. He hadn't put them there. No one should have been able to. He'd been the only one on the floor. For the first time in years, he thought about just leaving the job early. Forget the mop, forget the trash. Just grab his coat and go. But rent was due next week, and he couldn't afford to lose hours. So, swallowing his nerves, Paul stepped inside. The papers on the desk weren't company forms. They weren't even typed. They were handwritten notes. Dozens of them. Each one said the same thing. Don't stay past midnight. Paul's skin crawled. Midnight. He pulled out his phone. The screen glowed back at him. 12:07 a.m. His stomach dropped. That's when the air shifted. The room grew colder, the kind of cold that bites through your clothes. The fluorescent light above him buzzed and dimmed. And from somewhere behind him, deep in the hall, came the sound of footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Getting closer. Paul spun around. The hallway was empty. But the footsteps didn't stop. They echoed off the walls, creeping closer, even though there was no one there. Paul backed into the office, heart pounding. The papers on the desk rustled as if stirred by a breeze, though the air was still. Then, all at once, the footsteps stopped. The silence was worse. He gripped the edge of the desk, willing himself not to bolt. That's when he heard it. A whisper. So faint he almost thought he imagined it. Time's up. The lights in the office snapped off. Paul stumbled back into the hall, fumbling for his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the far end of the hallway. And there, the door to the stairwell was open. He hadn't opened it. It was just swinging there, slowly, as if inviting him in. Paul didn't wait to find out what would happen next. He grabbed his cart, shoved it into the elevator, and hit the ground floor button so hard his finger hurt. The doors closed just as he swore he saw a shadow slip into the hall. By the time he made it to the security desk in the lobby, he was shaking. The guard on duty looked up, confused. "You okay, man?" Paul tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. In the end, he just said, "I'm not going back up there." He never did. Paul quit that night. Walked out and never returned. A few weeks later, the building brought in a new janitor. First night on the job, he followed the same routine. Started at the bottom, worked his way up. When he got to the 8th floor, he noticed something strange. Office 812's door was cracked open, and inside, sitting neatly on the desk, was a fresh stack of papers. The top page had only one line written on it. Don't stay past midnight.